Right, so we're live. Hi everyone, this is Dr. Victoria Nalule, and here with me is Miss Rose Mosi. And in today's discussion, we're going to talk about mineral sharing agreements. So this is like an alternative of petroleum sharing. So we're live. Hi everyone, this is Dr. Victoria Nalule, and here with me is Miss Rose Mosi. And sorry about that. So this is an alternative of petroleum sharing agreements. And the question is, can mineral sharing agreements be embraced in Africa? What are the prospects? What are the challenges? And what are the opportunities? So this is one of the webinars I'm hosting during this period where different book contributors are actually getting a chance to discuss the findings in their book chapters. So before we start, I'd like Ms. Rose to briefly introduce herself.
All right, thank you, Victoria, for giving me this platform. I'm very grateful. My name is Rose Mosi. I'm Kenyan, and my background is law, particularly energy and natural resources law. I have a master's in the same field from Queen Mary, and currently I'm a practicing lawyer and consultant within the energy and natural resources field. I had the privilege of working as an Oxford Law and Policy Fellow, and I worked in country within Namibia, particularly in the Ministry of Mines and Energy. So in the ministry, I coordinated different projects, both in the mining and energy sector. And of course, I also worked with other intergovernmental bodies and ministries, such as the Ministry of Fisheries, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Lands, particularly, and the Attorney General's office on energy and mining issues, as well as natural resource issues. So briefly, that is my experience within this field. And I've also had the opportunity to do some regional work, particularly on the model mining law for Africa, which is continuing. And yeah, so let's see what the future has to hold.
All right, thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm really impressed by your experience, career experience, because you've really, you seem to have done a lot with respect to extractive sector in Africa, not only in Kenya, but also other countries like Namibia. So the focus today is on petroleum, on mining, sharing agreements. Sorry, will you be sharing your slides?
No, I'll just speak for now.
All right, so the focus today is on mining sharing agreements, and the question is, can we embrace this type of agreements in the mining sector? Because I think most African countries have not really thought about mining sharing agreements. They have thought about it, but they haven't implemented the idea. So the question is, have the petroleum sharing agreements worked in the petroleum sector? And in this respect, should we borrow the same ideas in the mining sector? And that will be the focus of our discussion today. And since you are writing a book chapter on this particular topic, I think you are the right person to actually take us through the issue of mining sharing agreements. So could you please give us a brief background about mining sharing agreements? And then afterwards, we shall take in questions. And that will be the end of our webinar.
All right, thank you, Victoria. You'll see me looking aside because I have some notes here that I just quickly jotted down. So they're called mineral production sharing agreements within the mining or mining production sharing agreements, depending on what you want to call them. Yes, we know production sharing agreements have worked very well in the petroleum sector. We know they emerged around the mid-1960s. Particularly from Indonesia, or the legal framework in Indonesia. And I think the rationale by the Indonesian government at that time was to ensure that they maximized revenue. They wanted to ensure they get the benefit of their oil, of their oil and gas, or the petroleum industry at that time. And so this was their way of ensuring they maximize benefits. So we are now trying to extrapolate that to the mining industry, and particularly the mining industry in Africa. In the petroleum industry, PSAs have become the norm. It's basically just a legal contract that is used. It's just a legal contract like any other contract, right? Or a legal framework And it's special, or would I say it's particular, because it brings this aspect of production sharing, that a company is able to come into a country where the government owns the resources, and the company is able to come in, invest its finances, of course, bring in the technology, and if they find oil or if they find petroleum resources, they are able to then recoup their costs, and whatever is what they call profit oil. Whatever is considered profit is then shared between the government and the investor. And this way, the idea is that the government is able to get the benefits of its resources, in this case, petroleum, one, much faster, depending on the structure of the PSA, and two, they're able to get more benefits from the petroleum resources. The previous contracts, which were mostly concessions, you'd find that the government did not get as much benefit as it should. It was basically a royalty system where the government would get royalty, and basically the company that was mining came, extracted, and paid royalty and took out the petroleum. So we are seeing PSAs came in to ensure that government maximizes its benefit. So this has been the question that a lot of African countries have been asking. They've been saying, as African countries, we're endowed with mineral resources. We have so much. We are countries that are currently developing. We want to push our development agendas. We want to ensure we meet the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. We want to ensure we improve the life of our people. We want to ensure we create employment. How do we do all this? How do we ensure we have sustainable development? And the discussion has been that one way is to ensure that we maximize the benefit of our mineral resources or our natural resources. And so the discussion has been, can we use the petroleum sharing agreement, framework and export it into the mineral industry and use that to ensure that we get maximum benefit. And that's the whole rationale. Can it work? Through my research, I've discovered one, that it's not a new concept. Nothing ever is under the sun. So it's not a new concept. You'll find the Philippines, for example, has had mineral mining production sharing agreements for a very long time. We are seeing countries like Senegal has already incorporated this idea of having mining production sharing agreements in their laws. The Congo, actually, DRC, entered into an agreement. So it's called Geka Mines, which is government owned. So it's sort of the mining company owned by government entered into mining production sharing agreement with what is it called? It's called Excel. It's a Hong Kong-based company. So you can see that the idea is not new, but at the same time, the idea of having mining production sharing agreements is not widely used within the mining field or within the mining sector. And the question is, why? Why haven't we taken up this opportunity if it is such a good idea and it has worked so well for the petroleum sector? And I'd just point out that primarily it's because of the peculiarities of the mining industry as opposed to the petroleum industry. And you'll find in the petroleum industry, you're just dealing with oil and gas. So it is very easy to come up with an agreement and standardize that agreement to the oil or the gas sector. When you come to mining, you're dealing with several minerals. You could be dealing with you're dealing with first metallic and non-metallic, and even in those categories, you're dealing with various minerals, right? From precious stones, semi-precious stones to, hazardous minerals like uranium, which are radioactive, to construction minerals, dimension stones. You're dealing with aggregates, for example. So you're dealing with a vast array of minerals. And you'll realize when you come to the mineral industry, each mineral functions a different way. That's one. And the market for that mineral is different. So you really need to understand that mineral. You have to understand how it's extracted, and you have to understand its market and how its the market dynamics work. That's one. And so it will create a challenge if you get into a production sharing agreement where government, for example, is supposed to take a portion of the production. So if you give the government a portion of diamonds, for example, another production sharing gives it a portion of gold, another one gives it a portion of dimension stones, another one gives it a portion of uranium. How will government sell these products in the market, assuming that, you know, it's government, its core role is not to get into business, but to ensure that whatever minerals it has are exploited for the benefit of its people. So you're then taking government into an arena where it has to, you know, engage in buying and selling, or in marketing these minerals, understanding those markets, and then selling them. It's not impossible, but I think that is a structure that we'd have to think about. How do we go about it? Do you give government a share of the minerals, or do you just give them the equivalent of that share, but in money? And in that case, that would mean we need technical expertise. That's the other thing. You know that a lot of governments, especially in developing countries like in Africa, for example, have a capacity problem. They do not have enough technical expertise to monitor their mining industries. And so getting them into a situation where they require a lot more technical expertise to monitor markets, to monitor the volumes of minerals, to monitor, you know, the sales, to ensure that they have the expertise to negotiate the agreements and negotiate a balanced agreement, to enforce and implement these agreements, will be a bit, I'd say, it would be a task for this government. So the demand on the governments in terms of technical expertise that they would need to ensure that the production sharing agreements are executed to the benefit of government within the mining industry would be difficult. So I think that is another deterrent for government. Then we look at the fact that a lot of developing countries in Africa are not mapped geologically. It is not wise to negotiate on something that you do not know about. So if you do not know how much of a certain mineral you have, let alone if you have the mineral at all, then what is your starting point when it comes to negotiation? And that is a disadvantage that a lot of African governments have. African countries have not mapped their countries in terms of minerals. Of course, there is exercise going on right now. There is AMREC, which is basically helping to set up a mapping framework for Africa. But until that is done, until African governments spend some money on mapping their countries and understanding the minerals they have and the quantities they have of these minerals, then I think it would not be wise to start negotiating individual contracts in the form of production sharing agreements for these minerals, because that would mean they would not get the deal that they want to get. So the idea of having a production sharing agreement in mining is not a bad idea. The question is, what do you need to implement this production sharing agreement to the benefit of the country? Because it can go both ways. The other peculiarity that you look at when it comes to mining and production sharing, you'll notice that production sharing agreements have a set annual limit for production and what can be allocated towards recovery of cost. Now, if you look at the mining industry, the capital investment fluctuates. You find you have to have, you find that the amount of investment that you're making in terms of capital keeps fluctuating as the mine develops between when you start production to when you close the mine. And because it keeps fluctuating, and you find that it is difficult to put a cap on production, because that means then the company may not be able to recover its costs, or the government will not be able to get the revenue that it intends to get because of that constant fluctuation. Same to the fluctuation in prices of minerals, right? They fluctuate quite a bit. There's like a boom and a bust, a boom and a bust. And even then, within the year, the prices keep fluctuating. So that can cause a problem when it comes to cost recovery for the mining company, the international mining company, and it would also cause a problem when it comes to the recovery or maximizing revenue when it comes to maximizing revenue for government. So if you look at the peculiarities of the PSA, they'd have to be modified. Some of those clauses or some of the terms that are used in the oil industry would have to be modified in order to fit the mining industry. So I think for this reason, a lot of countries have not gravitated towards using production sharing agreements. However, I'd say a lot of countries you'll find in their legislation either provide for production sharing, especially the countries that have reviewed their mining codes in the last few years are actually providing for the option of production sharing. And if you look at older mining codes, they give provision for mining agreements or mineral agreements, which is a way for the government to negotiate specific terms. What would be the benefit of having a production sharing if you choose to have it? I think the key benefit would be the flexibility of entering into a negotiated contract. And this would give government, if well negotiated, the ability to negotiate, of course, to increase the revenue that it gets. That would be one. But two, we are getting into a situation in Africa where we are demanding that we have more, we have a higher role, or governments play a bigger role within the mineral industry. So that would help governments negotiate their participation within their own mineral industries. And third, it would also give them the flexibility of negotiating local content. The challenge of having what they currently have in many African countries is a licensing system. First come, first serve. The problem with licensing systems is they tend to be very rigid. And the difficulties a lot of African countries have had is basically incorporating local content provisions in the laws. So you'll find having a negotiated agreement helps incorporate local content provisions within the agreement that is suitable, of course, for that particular transaction or that particular agreement and company, but also for the benefit of the country. So the argument would be then you're able to benefit more in terms of getting better local content provisions for the country. So in a nutshell, I think I've glossed through it really fast, but in a nutshell, that would be the rationale for and against having a production sharing agreement within the mining sector. Yes, Victoria?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you very much for the presentation. So I see we have someone online.
Yeah.
Brett, do you have any questions for us? I've promoted him to see.
Okay, no problem.
I see Brett online. Do you have any questions for us with respect to the discussion on mining agreements? I think he's on mute, but I think I'll go ahead and ask my question. So, so with the mining sharing agreements, remember the mining sector, we also have issues concerning artisan and small scale mining. So how do you see us incorporating this idea of mining sharing agreements into the ASM sector? Because it's also a very important sector in African countries whereby many people are actually involved in these sectors. So how do we incorporate the ideas from the petroleum sharing agreements into the entire mining sector, not only large scale mining, but also small scale mining. What are your views on that?
I think, let me just say, for the small scale miners, I think it will be difficult, because even if you look at the petroleum sector, the production sharing agreements are used at a large scale extraction level, not really a low or a small scale extraction level. And I think that's the benefit or the nature of the petroleum industry, that a lot of the extraction is usually at a large scale. And your question is actually a good point. I think first we'll have to streamline the ASM industry, because as we speak, we cannot even talk about entering into production sharing. A lot of countries don't recognize small scale miners. They're considered illegal if you think about it. So first we have to streamline this artisanal and small scale miners first. And once we get them onto a framework that at least can work, then we see what provisions we can import when it comes to production sharing. But I think for artisanal miners and small scale miners, because most of them tend to be nationals of that particular country, I think it would be more important not to get into production sharing, but for government to create a platform where their production can be purchased. So, because you'll find most of them don't know where to. So if they'll, for example, mine a particular stone, or they'll mine copper, they sell them to, they tend to sell them to individuals who come into the country and are looking for that particular mineral. So if government can streamline and create a platform where artisanal and small scale miners can actually mine, and then connect them either to the market, or they themselves can buy the product, which is a bit difficult, I agree, but find a way of purchasing the minerals and then selling them, into getting a way of taking them to market, then that would be great. So I think that would be the first or the most important bit for ASM, connecting them to the market, streamlining them and then connecting them to the market. As opposed to entering into production sharing with them, because anyway, their quantities are never that large.
All right, thank you very much for that. And then my last question actually would be, do you envisage a situation where governments will actually benefit from the mining sharing agreements? Because I think, like as you mentioned, for a very long time, African countries have been involved in the mining sector, and obviously we attract lots of large-scale mining companies from different countries, foreign companies, but the benefits are not so visible in some countries, except let's say Botswana and maybe Namibia. But for other countries, you see they're still struggling to show the benefits that accrue from the sector. So in your opinion, what do you think we should do to ensure that? Because I know we've also utilized petroleum sharing agreements, but you can still see there's some countries that are struggling with the resource costs and all the issues associated with the extractive industry. So in your opinion, what best way can African countries adopt the mining sharing agreements in a way that the local communities will actually see visible benefits of the mining sector? So maybe there are certain provisions we can embrace, or we can even insert that we haven't thought about. So what would you say would be practical to make the mining sharing agreements enforceable and beneficial to the local communities also in the countries?
Okay, let me say, first thing from my experience is the question of maximizing or optimizing the benefit we get from the mineral industry is a complex and simple problem at the same time. Why do I say so? Because it's complex in the sense that there's a lot of interests involved in the mineral sector. That's what I would say. And these interests tend to be differing, and not just the interest of the mining company or the government. There's also the interest of the communities and the interests of the different citizens. If you come to a country like Kenya, for example, we have 47 counties, and we found, let me talk of our largest, we are not a very large mining country, but I think what what they've been, which is an issue anyway. I think what we've been trying to mine, or what we're mining, is coal in the coast, and the rest is bauxite somewhere in the Rift Valley, but that's small quantities. I think there's some little gold here and there, but if you think about it, like the coal, let me use the coal, or let me use the oil that we found. The oil has been found in Laikipia, which is in the northern part of the country, but you'll find we already get talking about benefit sharing amongst all the 47 counties. And if you followed the discussions, it was a challenge. It was a challenge coming to an agreement. So that tells you how many interests are in this particular mineral. And those differing interests tend to complicate the issue. We are not even talking about the regional or the international interests in that particular mineral in your country. But it's a simple problem in the sense that it requires political will. If we can get the political will to ensure that we exploit these minerals in a sustainable way, then I think we'll be able to do it. Then that question also needs you to look at benefit as a continuum. So maximizing benefit is not maximizing revenue. You can maximize revenue that you get from the mineral industry, but not maximize the benefit. So once you get the revenue, which is the first point, the collection of revenue, but we have to ensure that this revenue is properly used. So the revenue can be properly collected, we can maximize the revenue we get, but if that revenue is not well used, it's not well planned for and utilized, then we will not see the benefit. So the question is, where is the problem? Is it in maximizing the revenue, or is it in utilizing the revenue? And I think that differs from country to country. But when it comes to production sharing, I'd still go back to the three things that I said. For African countries to even think about using production sharing as a model for maximizing the revenue that they get from the mineral industry, I think first they have to build their capacity. That's important. Second, they have to map their minerals so that you know what you're negotiating with or for. And so capacity, minerals, mapping, and what else? What else did I say? Sorry. And I think they need to have, how do I put this? So, for you to maximize, you also have to have a bigger plan. So you have to plug the mineral industry into your economic strategy. So I think the other thing is they need to understand their long-term plan. What is their long-term plan? What are their economic, social, environmental strategies? What do they want to achieve? So that when they're negotiating these agreements are not negotiated in isolation, but they're being negotiated in such a way that they plug in or they further the long-term plan. So I think those would be the three things that they need to get clear. I think if they can clarify those three things, build capacity, know what they're negotiating for, and have a plan, then I think it probably can work.
All right, thank you very much. And then the last question relates to the issue, because we're talking about capacity, and we're also seeing many developing countries trying to enforce local content provisions. So in your opinion, do you think if African countries embrace the mining sharing agreements, will they also be able to enforce the various local content laws and provisions they have come up with? Because we also seen the petroleum sector, countries really want to empower the local people, empower local expertise, empower local companies. So in the mining sector, because it's also lacking, that's why we see many artisan and small-scale miners still using rudimentary methods of mining, despite the fact that they coexist with large-scale mining companies. So with this initiative of mining sharing agreements, in your opinion, do you think it will also be a way of enforcing the various content provisions we have or we want to advocate for in various African countries?
Yes, I think it can be a good way of incorporating local content and the threshold of local content that you want to incorporate. And now that I think about it, if you think about Botswana and if you think about Namibia, the agreement that the government of Botswana and the government of Namibia have with De Beers is, I can argue, more or less a form of, it's not strictly a production sharing, but it is similar. It has certain similarities to it. And one thing that you realize, especially Botswana has been able to do very, very well by getting into that agreement is ensure local content. You know, they've been able to basically build the country through and build their local content, and not necessarily in mining, but in other sectors as well, through this particular agreement that Botswana entered into with the government, with De Beers. So yes, I think if it is well negotiated and well structured, it is a good way of getting into, or a good way of boosting local content. But I'd say it would make more sense if you are getting into this agreement for large mineral deposits. Like if you look at Botswana, there are mineral deposits in Namibia for diamonds, both of them. These are very large mineral deposits. So the government has the incentive to say, we are willing to partner 50-50 with De Beers on this, because it's a large mineral deposit that it would not make sense to just leave one company alone to mine and get the benefit. So let us share in that benefit 50-50 and see how we can use our 50 and also our influence as government to ensure that we benefit in terms of revenue, we benefit in terms of local content. So I think it is possible with some good strategy and some good lawyers and economists, to structure the deal. That's where it starts, the planning. If you don't plan well, ultimately you fail.
All right. Thank you very much, Rose. I think we're running out of time. So okay. I'll let you give the concluding remarks. You summarize the key issues with respect to incorporating the principles of petroleum sharing agreements in the mining sector. What, in summary, just in summary in a few seconds or 1 minute, what are the key considerations for policymakers, African policymakers, if they are to even think about incorporating the principles of petroleum sharing agreements into the mining sector? What should they look out for? What should they strengthen? Like, what should be the way forward to make it practical and also enforceable in these countries?
All right. First, I'd say it's not impossible to apply the principles or the idea of production sharing in mining. Even though it will have some challenges, it is not impossible. There are countries that are doing it. That is one. Two, I think I'd urge African policymakers to plan. Of course, there's the planning stage, and then we get into the framework of how we'll design the industry. And if you decide that production sharing is the framework that you're going to use, then you first need to map your countries and understand the minerals that you have. You need to build the capacity of your people in government, and you need to understand what your larger economic, social, and environmental strategies are. As a country, where do you want to go, and how does the mining or the mineral industry plug into your larger goal as a country? And I think once those are aligned, then negotiating the production sharing will at least you have a shot at ensuring that you get the best deal through negotiating a production sharing agreement.
All right, thank you very much, Rose, for the brilliant and very important discussion, because I think this is really important in the mining sector, considering the fact that all countries are looking for ways to benefit from the sector. The host communities, the local communities, even us people in the professional life, we're all finding ways of ensuring that the countries benefit from the sector. And I think this is a very good idea to discuss mining sharing agreements as an alternative or as one of the ways to ensure that countries benefit from the sector. So this will be the end of our webinar. Our viewers, do not forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Victoria Nalule. It's actually Dr. Victoria Nalule. You can watch all the previous videos with respect to energy and mining, featuring different experts from different countries. And also, we shall share the link to Rose's video. It will be featured in her book chapter in our new edited book project, which is focused on the future of the African energy sector. So look out for the video, look out for her book chapter, and please stay in contact. Would you like to share your contact details, Rose?
I'll just share my email.
Yeah.
My email is rosemosi, ROSEMOSI @gmail.com. If you email me, I'll definitely respond.
All right, thank you for that. And this marks the end of our webinar. Thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure hosting you, Rose.
Thank you, Dr. Nalule.
All right, you take care and have a lovely week.
All right, you too. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.